Hi, everyone. Emmy voting is now over, which means that the stars of the past year's biggest TV shows now get to take a little bit of a publicity break, at least unless they're lucky enough to be actually nominated for Emmys, in which case the process will start all over again. But the celebrity publicity circuit is, of course, never ending, and in the coming weeks, we'll be seeing massive stars like Scarlett Johansson, Brad Pitt, and Liam Neeson putting themselves through all kinds of different interviews to promote their big summer blockbusters. And as you might have noticed last time you saw a major star eating hot wings on camera, the steps on that publicity circuit look really different than they did about a decade ago. So today, I'm joined by my colleague here at The Ankler, Nicole LaPorte, who recently wrote a feature about the 19 press tour stops that ruthless publicists care about and the ones they don't. She'll explain to me how the publicity landscape has shifted so quickly, which campaign stops still matter, and why the old process is still hanging in there for awards campaigns, at least, though maybe not for long. I am Katie Rich, and this is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. Hello, Nicole. Thank you for taking the meta approach to a world that I know very well as someone who books celebrities on this very podcast. I don't know how through the looking glass this conversation is going to get, but I'm excited to talk about it.
Oh, let's get meta, Katie, please.
I mean, that is in the spirit of The Ankler, I think, is to talk about all the things that we're all obsessed about, but don't necessarily make it out in public. So you're right there in the grand spirit of things, as you well know, I think.
Yes. Well, thanks for having me.
So the title of your story, which I don't know if our CEO Janice Min had a hand in your fantastic headline, as she always says for mine, but it's a fantastic headline because it really does get at the heart of not just that these are the the interview shows that are getting big, but these are the ones that publicists who like really only care about getting their names out there can really invest in. So why was the ruthlessness of the publicists important to the vibe of the story that you were telling here?
Yeah, well, first of all, yes, absolutely a Janice headline because she knows this world so well and has such a nose for it. But I think it's just, the ruthlessness of the publicists is, as you know, getting behind these campaigns. It's a dog-eat-dog world. And, you have to just push your stars and get them on platforms that are going to matter and that are going to move the needle and draw viewers and draw critics. And that is changing so quickly. So it's like I feel like the sort of vibe of the story is, these behind the scenes publicists and marketers just scrambling and pulling their hair out to figure out, what platform is hot this week, because it will probably be different, from what was hot last week. And many people in their department may have never heard of this influencer. It's just like a very crazy world. And the publicists are just doing everything they can to, get their stars on the right platforms.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting the way that this is kind of old Hollywood crashing into new Hollywood. And it's something that our colleague Natalie Jarvie writes a lot about, writing about the influencer economy and the way that Hollywood sort of understands it and sort of doesn't. So it's like these publicists, a lot of whom are like old school and have old school clients, are kind of on the vanguard of understanding how all of these influencers work. So it seems like in these quotes you got a lot of people being like, I don't know who Theo Von is, but I guess I have to. So I'm going to figure it out. They're kind of being forced into the future against their will.
Yeah, I mean, actually, one of the most interesting things I came across in this reporting was that there are definitely two camps of marketers and publicists. And whether you're talking to folks at a studio or a talent agency or an independent, marketing or publicity company, you would have one conversation with, like you say, the OGs who have been around forever and they know all the nuances of NPR and how to get your star, how to get the movie profiled in the New York Times or whatever on 60 Minutes. But when you throw some of these YouTube names or influencer names at them, they don't always know who you're talking about. And at a certain point, I was like, I need to talk to digital influencers. I need to talk to, your digital folks. And then I would get on the phone with people who, of course, were, much younger than myself, I will say. And they, I could just imagine them sitting at their desk with like 10 feeds. They are just inhaling Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. And they can watch, they've done like a PhD thesis on every one of these stars and influencers and shows that are very obscure. But I just found it interesting that it felt like there were two brains at work at these companies. Like the traditional and sort of the older publicists who often are like running the campaign, they absolutely realize the importance of digital and, absolutely incorporate it, but they are not necessarily versed in the ins and outs of it. And they really kind of let the digital folks run with that and forge the relationships and invite all these folks to the premieres and to the junket. So it was just interesting. It felt a little bifurcated, which was surprising.
Yeah. So in your story, you start off not with these kind of like new media people who everyone's wrapping their heads around, but, the stalwarts, the people who actually do want to spend time with, even if they're a little bit more old school. Did it surprise you which ones people thought were still relevant? Like, Jimmy Fallon's Tonight Show TikTok feed apparently is a really important stop, which I might not have guessed. What surprised you with those old media ones and what people said?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting how much, like you say, the quote unquote old stops tie into this new world based on their social following. So like the Today Show and Jimmy Fallon and all the Tonight shows, what goes on the couch or in the chair is not really that important. If you look at the Tonight, the late night numbers, I think they get maybe 2 million, viewers per episode. But what happens is that interview then gets sliced and diced, or maybe there's a funny comment that turns into a meme and gets blasted out through all of their social media channels, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or Instagram. And that's where kind of the magic happens. Everyone is just looking for little bits of content that are going to be shared and that are going to show up on people's feeds. But you still need, I guess the point is, that they were making is you still need that sort of initial interview to take place. So you still need the star to go on the Today Show in order to get the little 2 seconds or 5 seconds or whatever it is that's going to be blasted out. And again, yeah, like you say, they do have, like Jimmy Fallon has huge, social media followers, as does the Today Show, as does a lot of these places. So it's sort of that interconnection between sort of the old school platform and sort of their newer veins.
Yeah. I mean, this is something I saw happen at Vanity Fair as well when I was there. You'd book these cover stories and you'd, take elaborate photos of Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande and, send a reporter to England to talk to them and all of this stuff. And the thing that goes viral with it that people notice is their lie detector test, like the video that goes adjacent to it. So, and there's a part of me, as I guess maybe an old school person, that's like, oh, it's just like a bit of content. It's 5 seconds that matters out of like months and months of work going into a story like this. But it's also the attention span, right? Like if you can, you have to do all of that work and do all of that reporting to get 5 seconds of something that people pay attention to, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I think so. And like you say, yeah, Cynthia Erivo, of course, out of all the money that they spent on the Wicked campaign, and I didn't go to the junket, but I hear it was so elaborate, and
next
they set
time
up
they got to invite
bedrooms.
us. We'll go.
There was, the yellow brick road. I mean, they did everything, and then what pops? But this strange interview with this journalist. This kind of obscure journalist and this weird little comment about holding space. And I mean, it just blows up. But like, you wouldn't have had it if you didn't set up the junket. Yeah. So I think there is this kind of interdependency. I mean, the other thing I'll say is, as much as, we can poo-poo, like, oh, it's only 5 seconds of content. And like you say, so much work goes into these sort of longer features and presentations, like, there is just so much skepticism, I think, especially with Gen Z and others, and I'll even include myself. Like we're all just a little tired of like the packaged interview and the star following the script and, sitting down with a journalist for 10 minutes and peddling the myth of the film. So I think underlying all of these kind of gimmicky little YouTube shows and TikTok things, it's like everyone's just trying to get to sort of take them out of their script or take them off script and get them into an unexpected setting where we might see a glimpse of like who they really are, who they quote unquote authentically are. So it's all trying to just get away from like the packaged, the package that the publicists and the marketers are sort of have been thrusting at us, for decades.
Yeah. No, that prep thing I think is really interesting. And, I sometimes don't want to think about it too much because I don't want to know what publicists tell their clients about me before they come on my podcast. Like, hopefully it's all relatively nice.
She's brutal. She's brutal.
I know. I don't want to know how good they think my questions are. But, that obviously is part of it. And so when you're talking to these publicists about how they're preparing these clients for, doing an interview with puppies or doing hot ones or even being on the Today Show, like what did you learn about what that prep looks like now and how these famous people who have other things to do are wrapping their heads around this world?
I mean, I think it just boils down to what the internet and what social media values, which is likability, which is the same thing as authenticity, which is all these buzzwords. But it's like, particularly with certain movies, that skew younger, you just want the actor to go on there and to come across as likable, as personable, as themselves. Like, that's what matters, I think. And like, for example, I wrote about Ben Affleck being on Theo Von, where they, it was like an hour and a half interview. They talked about the movie for 5 seconds, essentially. Theo Von had not seen the movie. But I don't think it mattered because you had an hour and a half of Ben Affleck just kind of broing out, shooting the shit with Theo Von, and he was likable. He was appealing. And I think I'm sure they considered that a huge win. So I think it's just be likable, be cool. If they throw you a curveball, don't get upset. Just be lighthearted. Like it's all the values of the internet. Be funny, be likable. Don't take yourself too seriously. So it's very different from sort of the old school, serious, James Lipton actor studio.
Well, you say that for younger skewing movies, but that just made me think of Ray Fiennes when he did New Year's Eve with Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper. I don't know if you saw this, but he was like, doing shots with them on a platform standing above Times Square. And he had this vibe of like, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm just going to do this. And it was really appealing. So like, I think it can work, I guess, in the right context with the right actors. Like, you don't have to be Timothee Chalamet to be able to pull this off.
Yeah. But I think, exactly. Ray Fiennes was in that moment. Yeah, it was very unexpected. It kind of broke the fourth wall. But and the publicists do say you cannot put everyone on these shows. There are stars that really guard their privacy. They're not going to respond. They're not going to get the joke or want to be in on the joke. Not going to want to laugh at themselves. So it is a limited, or it's a select group of people who can do this. Yeah.
It was so interesting the way you got into Joe Rogan, which, was kind of you basically had one person saying like, it's a risk, but it's worth doing. And then someone else saying it's a risk that's not worth doing. He can be such a polarizing figure, but it's clear that he's still booking people. So like, how are people weighing that risk with people like him or anyone else who might be controversial and saying, okay, I'm going to go for it anyway?
I mean, I think his numbers, at this point, with the state of Hollywood being what it is and the state of movie-going in particular being what it is, anything that has huge numbers, people are willing to overlook, the flaws or the risks or, however polarizing it might be. And he is just such a force, especially with men and young men whom Hollywood desperately wants to get into theaters. So I talked to one publicist who said, at every marketing meeting, he comes up. That someone on the studio side will say, will the talent go on Rogan? Every single meeting. And I said, well, what's the response? And he's like, huge resistance from the talent. So generally the talent says no. Yeah. But it just shows you that Hollywood, they're on. Like, it is so, the numbers are immense. Obviously I think it's for a certain film, if it was just such a cultural clash with, what he stands for and believes in, probably that wouldn't come up. But I think for like a general entertainment movie, like, yeah, why not tap into, 50 million viewers or whatever the crazy numbers are? It's high.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about Dakota Johnson and Chris Evans, like kind of going viral, being on the Today Show, which is made sense as a fit for materialists. But she went on Amy Poehler's podcast, not Joe Rogan. Like the fit can, I think, be kind of obvious from the outside, but it sounds like they, some of these people really want to push it and be like, hey, maybe I will like put you into this new audience and see if we can get some gold from it.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't want it to blow up,
in the bad way, not in the viral way.
Yeah, right, exactly, in the bad way. Like someone, I think this was in the story, but a publicist was like, I mean, there are certain people I would never put on Rogan, even if it was, a green light, because, I just feel like they would have a fist fight and like it wouldn't work. So I think
I would watch that.
And again, like I know you're right. That's probably a bad example, but I think also like. One thing I didn't think about until I was talking to publicists is the length of these interviews. Like Theo Von is an hour and a half. Even Hot Ones, it's like a half hour of filming. That's a lot of time. That is not a 7-minute hop on the Today Show, say 3 funny things and talk about your summer vacation and you're done. So there are only, again, it's a select number of people who can really get on and hold on for that long and be interesting and, just keep the conversation going.
Well, maybe that's the argument that the old school magazine profile, you get a lot of time with someone isn't totally dead. Like, I think if you are writing a cover story for Vanity Fair, you don't get the access you might have 30 years ago. But Theo Von getting an hour and a half, or even on Hot Ones where it's shorter, but the questions are like really good and they kind of come ready for anything. Like you are getting more in-depth stuff, even if it's a 5-second clip that people actually watch. You're making me think more positively about it a little bit.
Yeah, I now follow all these people.
Of course.
But I think just jumping back to Vanity Fair and New York Times, I mean, certainly for awards campaigns, and I think the value of the New York Times is often, you just want to make sure that your movie is going to be included in the fall previews, for critics and for older viewers. So the prestige and sort of the cultural weight, the cultural currency of those publications, that's still very real, especially, with more sort of prestige fare.
Yeah, well, and that's always my counter argument on the Timothee Chalamet thing. He came up a lot in your story as just someone who really did this alternative publicity circuit really, really well and won over a lot of people who, saw his college football picks or whatever. But he didn't win the Oscar because in the meantime, Adrian Brody was going and shaking hands at the Governor's Awards and stuff like that. So it does feel like there's a limit to it. And I think your story was more focused on general publicity things, but there are these old school formats that at least if you're trying to win an award, I think are hanging in there a lot more strongly than they are for everything else.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, if you're going to do 10 of these kind of crazy Nardwuar, the human serviette interviews like Timothee Chalamet did, you could argue, or you could ask the question, does that hurt your credibility when you then do show up at sort of a more high profile, governor's ball or whatever? I mean, then do you really look like you're shilling because, you've just kind of given up some of your auteur, or highbrow film chops. I think that is a question.
Do you think that some people are skewing so indie that they've closed off the lane where they can go to the Ace Eddie Awards to win some Academy votes?
I mean, I guess you could also argue that everything is there are so many different lanes and they don't overlap at all that probably the people at the Academy events are not watching.
That's true. They don't know who Nardwuar
the
is.
YouTube shows. So, right. So I think so I'm now just contradicting myself, but you probably can sort of get away with existing in all these different lanes and no one knowing about it because it's just not a monoculture anymore. I mean, none of our Instagram feeds and TikTok feeds overlap, to some extent, but, we each have our very individualized tastes that, we're sort of plugged into our own little ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah. When you were talking to all of these publicists and, they're convincing their clients to do things, do you get the sense that anyone really knows what works, what does move the needle? Or are they just blasting the landscape as much as they possibly can and hoping that one of those things will raise their client or their project above the waterline?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think it's, flood the zone. It's still flood the zone. It's just a different, what does flood the zone look like now versus what did it look like 20 years ago? Mm-hmm. I don't think they know. And especially because so much on the internet changes so quickly. And, the show that was really popular 2 months ago, now there's another one that everyone's obsessed with. So it's they're sort of chasing what's hot on TikTok or who the new influencer is. But I think there's just a fear. There's serious FOMO about not being on something that could produce that viral clip or that meme that's really gonna, take off. So yeah, it doesn't feel super select. It feels blasting. It feels like a fire hose, just across their landscape. With some of them, I think have kind of risen to the top of the list, like Hot Ones for sure. Alex Cooper for sure. Someone compared doing Alex Cooper to what a Vogue cover was many years ago. So I think there are some that are the standards and then everything else is let's just try it out.
Do you feel like it's always been this much flood the zone? Like you were saying, it's kind of always been this way. Is this more chaotic than it always used to be? Or was it, you were doing self and glamour before and now you're doing podcasts?
Yeah, I think there's just so many more outlets. I think it's just more chaotic because you've got people who are big on Instagram, but then you have people who are big on TikTok and then YouTube, but then you can't forget the glamours. So I think it's just many, many, many more outlets because everything has just become so niche. You can't use your fire hose to take care of 3 major demos. You need to do 10 or 20 digital shows to cover that same ground.
How do they convince talent to do this? I don't know if anyone would reveal that secret to you, but I'm just imagining, if I'm Ben Affleck, I must be tempted 10 times a day to be like, forget it. I got money. I'm going to go home. Why does anyone go through all of this?
Yeah, I know. That is a good question. I think Timothee Chalamet is unique in appearing to truly enjoy it and really got all of those appearances he just geeked out on and went deep and seemed to be having a great time. I think that's unusual. I mean, I don't know, when I saw Patrick Schwarzenegger do the jog with Kate Max, the Central Park runner, I mean, obviously that seemed very true to him. So sometimes I think it is a really good match. I think Chicken Shop Date, they seem to be sort of enjoying the sort of weirdness of it.
Yeah, I was going to say Andrew Garfield has really managed to make the Chicken Shop Date specifically, but also, he has these viral interview moments where he's very sincere. He's not kind of broy like Timothée Chalamet, but he somehow makes it seem like a natural extension and not just he's going through the motions, which is impressive.
Yeah. And he's sort of a mystery guy. You don't know too much about him. So I think it makes it even more interesting when he's in these kind of surprising elements.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's certain people we're just never going to see. Jeremy Allen White, I don't think we're going to be seeing. I don't know. He just strikes me as very kind of serious. And, I can't see him wanting to play this game. So I think it's certain talent.
It'd be nice if Leonardo DiCaprio would go on a Chicken Shop Date, but I feel like he's graduated himself out of that requirement by now.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be excellent. I would watch that.
So as I know some of these things. I feel like I have a pretty average level of understanding of these new media things. I know Joe Rogan and Chicken Shop Date, but some of these smaller ones I had never heard of before your story. So who's doing it well that people might not know about? Who's the future of pulling off these interviews?
So the Nardwuar, I just like to say that word, so I have to bring it up. Nardwuar, the human serviette, whom I had not heard of. Surprise, surprise. But I remember talking to a marketer and they were like, yeah, this executive's son was so impressed that we got Nardwuar. And I was like, oh, okay. That's sort of the highest praise when the studio boss's kid is thumbs up. But I thought I think he's interesting. He has a music background. So I think Drake has been on there and he, for Timothy, they showed up at a record shop and they just go through and they spend an hour talking music and he does extensive research for his interviews. So he goes in and, knows everything he'll know the talent's body of work and the weird facts about them. And so I think that always, and you probably know this just as a journalist, when you bring those kind of things up, you always get a little bit of respect from the person you're talking to and a little bit more oh, okay, let's talk. You did your work. They kind of want to be more amenable. But I think he's really fun and he's kind of weird. He's sort of this Weird Al vibe. So the whole thing is just kind of strange and interesting, but because there's this underpinning of real knowledge, and a really kind of serious conversation about music. I think that one's definitely on my radar now. We talked about Chicken Shop Date. She's like old school. Like everybody knows that.
That's true. She's like, as by internet standards, she's been around a long time. I mean, there's a couple of children on here, like Taylon Biggs. I had no idea who that was. Like, that is fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think she's 11 years old, and she is just like the Disney sweet spot. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what her Disney swag level is, but you know, the house must be full of like every piece of Disney merchandise they've given her. But yeah, they invite her to junkets, and she's like this perky little girl, and she'll do like a 5-second thing with The Rock, and it's super cute, and it gets, I don't know, 5 million views, 10 million views.
Man, wow.
But she's like, I know, those are, there's nothing deep going on there. It's really just she is appealing to like her demo, right? And so that's, for Disney, obviously that's huge. But yeah, if you look her up, she is invited to every single, like, basically kids movie ever made or ever being made. Yeah, and then Recess Therapy, I hadn't heard of, but they bring, I thought the Ben Affleck one was funny because he's just Ben Affleck and putting him in like a playground and sitting him down with 5-year-olds and whatever that conversation looks like.
Yeah. I have a lot of these I need to watch. So to ask you for advice, I guess, after diving into this, as someone who does these interviews, I mean, it sounds like asking smart questions is still not totally out of style as learned from Nardwuar and Hot Ones. But is there anything else that just someone who wants to get attention for their interview should be doing? Like, do you have to have a gimmick? Is there a secret to being one of these guys?
Yeah, Katie. I mean, you need to be like out in Central Park running with your guests. Like, what?
Absolutely.
What are you doing in a studio? What is this?
You.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think if the world were just these kind of gimmicky, shticky videos, I think that would be a very sad commentary on the state of movie and TV press tours. I think what we were talking about earlier, and you do this, so you're good. You're totally good. But,
thank you. I was fishing for compliments. I appreciate it.
But just always trying to get to like the real self and not always staying on the script of what, everything that the publicists have told them to talk about and how genuine and kind the director was. I think that stuff just starts to get old. So, whenever they're getting beneath that and just really when you can get them a little in an unexpected place or talking in an unexpected way, I think that's what people want. But no,
so
absolutely.
much easier said than done.
There is no, I'm telling you, just tell them to bring running shoes and guards go down.
I gotta work on my running. That's my incentive to sign up for the next 5K, so I can have my gimmick in place. Well, Nicole, thank you for explaining all of this to me and to everyone who read your piece if they haven't yet. And next time someone shows up on a YouTube show that I can't explain, I'm going to ask you to explain it to me because now you're the expert. Sorry, this is your field now.
Oh my gosh, that's scary. Thank you so much for having me.
That does it for today's episode. As you might have noticed, there's no interview with someone at the back half of this show. We're kind of in a mid-period between the end of Emmy nomination voting and nominations announcements on July 15th. We'll, of course, have a podcast for that moment when it comes. So for the next couple of weeks, enjoy me talking to Ankler colleagues and other people about stuff that isn't necessarily about the current awards race. Personally, I am looking forward to it. In the meantime, this podcast is edited by Brett Fuchs and produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, Nicole LaPorte. Subscribe to the Prestige Junkie newsletter at theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We will see you next week.